before we move on, I want to give the opportunity for people to ask any questions that may have arisen in the last couple of days, even about your career. If you're now thinking with what you're learning, what you've seen so far, are there any questions you may have about, okay, so how is this going to play out for me into the future? I'm just wondering if anyone's got any burning questions that they want to talk about of how your career may be looking, what you're thinking now of doing. Has there something that has sparked your interest?
Is it difficult to get a start?
Okay, Luke's asked, is it difficult to get a start? And that's a really, most people will ask that. Either, is it difficult to get a start, or how do I get in? How do I get my foot in the door?
How do I break into the industry?
Yeah, how do I break into the industry? That's where you need to make contact with a larger organisation, your Quantum Corps and all those, of just getting in touch with them. And they're pretty good. Like, it's how I did it. I got in with Quantum Corp in Sydney, and they were great. I rang them and said, look, this is what I'm interested in. And I said, no worries, do you want to come in? We'll give you 3 days. You can work with us for 3 days. And so I just went down to their office. I think it's in Manly or Brookvale. I don't know if they're still there, but I think that's where they were. And I went down. I sat in the office and went through with one of their chief investigators some jobs that he had on his books that he was looking at, saw how they did things. I told him my experience and what I wanted to do. We had some coffee, some good chats. And then after 3 days of seeing how they did things, they actually gave me a job to go, and he said, look, I have actually, because I was in Armidale at that time, and Inverell was only an hour or two away, and he said, I've got this job in Inverell, I've got to get a statement off someone for a workplace matter. He said, is it possible you can just go and sit with this person and just get a knock out a statement off them? All right, I can do that. So I went home and got my computer together, went out, sat down with this person, got a statement, got back, downloaded it. Once again, as Greg explained, each company has their own system, and so they just sent me this file where all I had to do was upload, sort of like the Vasto system with doing this course. It's they have like the templates, you fill them in, upload it into their system. It's a secure system, and then it goes to them, and then they take that statement and they put it in with the rest of the investigation that they're putting together. So that's what I did, and that's how I got the start. And it snowballed from there. They looked at my statement and went, yeah, pretty happy with that. Let's give Paul another job. And then it's up to you, however far you want to travel. You just say to them, I'm available to do whatever you're willing to do, and however far you're willing to go. And so you just keep on doing that and building it up. And then you get to the point of, well, okay, I'm doing this work for, let's say, Quantum Corp. Maybe I could contact another large company and start doing some work for them as well. It's not really competition, because you're just doing a job for both companies. Like, you're getting a statement, it's no biggie. They don't mind if you're a subcontractor. So you're just making yourself available for them to do some work. So you go out and you start subcontracting for other companies, and then you will probably start to get, well, hopefully you'll start to get a bit of a name for yourself. And then people may even contact you directly, and you can start your own company, investigation company, and start building your own client base from there. And so the great thing I love about private investigation is you can have a job, be doing this course, finish the course, get your license, then while you've still got a job and still got an income coming in, you can actually go out and grab a statement of someone and do some extra work and build that up. And so you can then take down your working situation and build up your private investigation situation and keep your income still coming in, and swap it over. And then you can grow it. That's the great thing I love about it, is you've got this opportunity to go, well, I can just do a couple of statements here and there and have an income, or you can really get into it and get a really good income coming in. And then you can put on your own subcontractors. The sky's the limit, really, of what you want to do. And everyone's different in what they want to do. There's some people that are retired and they just want a little bit of supplement income. So they'll just do a statement here or there. So it's up to you what you want to do. Got a question?
Yes, we've got a few questions from the online members, Paul. How hard is it to break into the industry? I think you've probably answered that. Tamara asks that if we would consider a student leaving your program. I assume, Tamara, you mean forensics, which is our investigative arm. Paul can talk about this, but yes, definitely. I think I spoke yesterday and said that I don't necessarily regard cops and ex-cops as being the best investigators, so don't think that just because you haven't been a cop or you haven't been in compliance or law enforcement or something else that you can't be a good investigator. Investigation skills are things that definitely can be learnt and practiced and be better at. It's got nothing to do with being a cop or being in law enforcement or border force or any of those things. People seem to think that's the only way in. As you know, as directors of forensics, we are a private investigation firm, although typically we do the higher level stuff. But I would most definitely hire someone based on, I can tell you now, their attitude and their general approach, rather than whether they were a cop for 20 years. So I would take someone brand new who's never done any law enforcement or anything, who's keen to learn, wants to know, and eager to learn new things and be better than some police officer who's been doing it for 20 years. It's not necessarily, and I think most big companies actually prefer. I know as an ex-cop, and Paul is too, that we went to companies and they weren't interested in us. And I can investigate things probably better than anybody, I think. If that's one thing I'm good at, that's it. And some of the bigger firms weren't interested because they've had bad experiences with cops, and I get that. So that's not necessarily a barrier. Selma asked, did we become police officers before a PI? Yes, we did. But again, following on from what I just said, that's, it's not a barrier. I don't want that to be a barrier to any of you. I mentioned in there, if you go to seek.com.au, which everyone should know what Seek is, if you don't, find out, because that's where all the jobs are. Type in investigator or investigations in your state, see what comes up. See who's advertising for investigators. Put your resume in, Quite happy to help you with your resume and getting it together, particularly when you finished your Cert 3. Elizabeth says, is it an idea to have, good idea I assume, to have a business mobile instead of using your own personal mobile for jobs? Yes, is the answer to that. Anything you want to comment further on that, Paul?
Yeah, especially with police officers, Greg and I, we're pretty focused and when we were cops in management and helping people and training people. That's why we've easily morphed to what we're doing now. And believe me, there are some police officers that both of us have worked with that we would not employ. Even detectives. We just look and go, no, would not take them on. But in saying that, there's also some very good ones. So just trying to be careful how I say this, but when I'm marking students, I can see, I can get a pretty good idea who's going to go well and who's not. And the reason I say that is, an example is last night I was assessing someone who did their interview, and the interview was this guy and his mate sitting on a lounge, relaxed. It looked like they were smoking some pot, having some beers, and knocking out this interview, and I was just unimpressed. Now, did they tick all the boxes of asking the questions and everything they need to do? Yes, they did. Did they do it professionally and someone I would employ? Absolutely not. So can I ask, keep that in mind And it's in everything that you do it professionally, do it well. I've had, and you can see the sample interview that I've given you in your course. You can see that Greg and I'm interviewing Greg, and it's a professional setup. It doesn't take much. It takes a table, 2 chairs in a room, being recorded, speaking well to each other, not sitting back having a drink. It's just professional. And so that's what I want to see. And that's what an employer wants to see. They don't want to see someone, and in the same way you dress. This guy was sitting in his shorts and thongs, and I'm like, would you interview someone like that? Would you actually sit down in shorts and thongs if you're out doing a job? Same when you do your court presentations. There's a couple of units where you have to present evidence, like you're presenting evidence in court. And what I want to see is someone standing in front of the camera, dressed probably like I am right now, in collar, maybe not a tie, I'm not wearing a tie, but sort of suit attire that you would wear to court. I want to see that in the video. I don't want to see someone standing there in their t-shirt or their singlet top and thongs reading out what they've put. Once again, they've ticked the box. Yes, I can see that they can read out and they can present in court, but it's not professional. And so I really can't emphasise enough how much that impacts of just everything you do it well. If you're going to do it well. It's my motto. So I just suggest that to you, that if I'm looking to employ someone, that's what I'm looking for, and I'm not alone. Other managers will be doing the same. Same when you rock up to do some work experience. If you get the chance to go and work at one of these places, do some days, dress appropriately. Put yourself in a professional manner. Anything else, Greg, coming through? All good? Is everyone happy with that? I don't want to stress anyone out with that, but I don't think there's anything to stress about. It's just being professional. Yep.
Just some inquiries coming through, perhaps in relation to resumes. So I know this is a thing. Look, we are happy to, we won't sit down and do your resume for you, because that's, it takes quite some time. Very, very happy to have a look over it and to provide to you some suggestions for improvement. So what the angle that we will be coming from is that, you want to craft your resume so it makes, so it touches on the skills that employers for PIs want, and that's certainly something we can help you with.
Yeah. In saying that, I'm reluctant, because I get asked this a lot, I'm reluctant to supply a letter to you for your resume, because I have a lot of students ask me, can you give me a reference so I can apply? I can't really do that, because it puts me in a position, yes, I've assessed you. All I can do, if I was to do that, is give you a letter to say, I have assessed you and I believe you are competent in the Cert 3 in investigative services. That's the best. I haven't actually gone and see you operate in the field. I don't know you personally. So it's probably no point asking for a letter from me, because all I can do, and Greg as well, is give you a letter of completion. Now, the certificate is exactly the same thing. You have the certificate, you have completed the course, and you have your transcript of all the units of competent. So there's probably no point in asking. As much as I'd love to help you and give you a letter, it's just not something that we can do. But as Greg said, more than happy to have a look over what you're going to put in for a job application. Greg?
Thanks, Paul. Just one question, reassessments from Tamara. She says, a few times I've started the answers, then had to leave the section. Does that mean she's attempted once, as there are 3 attempts? Can you talk to that?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not too sure what you mean by you've answered some and then had to leave it, because you don't have to lodge that. You just save it onto your computer as a file, and then when you get a chance, you come back and complete it, and then you upload it to the assessment and lodge it. So, but for those that are starting, especially when you get this first unit, I often say to students, because I'll get, oh, I'm really not too sure what to do here. I'm okay with that. What I suggest is to people, just have a go at the first scenario and lodge it for assessment. And so I can give you a guide if you're on the right track or not. I'm more than happy to do that. And send me, when you lodge it, just send me also a message saying, hey Paul, I've lodged my first assessment, just the first scenario. I'd really like, before I go on and do the other two or however many scenario templates, I'd really like just your guidance on this. Am I on the right track? I'm more than happy. I don't want you to waste your time if you think you're doing the wrong thing and you complete 3 templates and they're way off track. I'm really fine with you just submitting. I'm not classing that as a submit and a fail or anything like that. Don't worry about that. That, just to let you know, that 3 submits is really for those students, and I've had some that will just try it on. They'll just put in, they don't even read the learner's guide. They just go, oh, that'll be whatever. Put it in, see if that's right. I'm not after that. And if you're going to keep on doing that, I'll only give you 3 resubmits. But when I can see someone's actually having a go and they're just missing the mark and I'm just trying to help them get it right, so they're going to be a professional, good investigator, look, we'll keep on going and we'll get it right. And I'm really not concerned about the 3 submits. But can I say, I really rarely have more than 2 submits. Normally, someone will submit it, and if they've just got it off track, or they've just haven't read the question, they've taken the question in a different way and they've given a different answer, I'll just get back to you and say, hey, just missed the mark on this one, but if you want to have a look at this or that, and normally the next time they submit, it's pretty spot on. So I'm really not concerned. And the only time I have those resubmits over and over is when people aren't reading the learner guide, and they're not bothering to do that, and not then they can't answer the question correctly, because all the answers are in the learner's guide, except when it comes to legislation, if you need to look up some legislation. But that's easy. Look up legislation and reference it. Hopefully that answers that. Another question?
A few other questions coming through. This is great, guys. This is what we're here for, to answer your concerns. One about the Cert 4. So, look, the Cert 4, as you would know when you've checked out our website, is a certificate for in government investigations. So it is really focused on government. However, what I will say is that it is the premier investigative qualification in the country. So yes, you can do a diploma. You can go to Charles Sturt University and do Bachelor and Masters of Investigations. That's all good. But the Cert 4 in government investigations is really the premier, and I know this because 1, we teach it for ourselves. 2, we also teach it for local government across Queensland. And the other thing is, you look at any investigative job, and this is why I say get onto Seek and have a look around at what jobs are going. Not only PI jobs, but other government investigation jobs. What you'll find is when you go through what they want from you, if to even get into that sort of role, is, funnily enough, a Cert 4 in government investigation. It's a very highly sought after qualification. I highly recommend it. I'm not here to sell it to you, okay? You know, it's going to be up to you whether you want to take your career that way. The other thing about the Cert 4 is there is a lot more assessment and it is a lot more complex. But yes, Amanda, it is a really good add-on, and it is, one of the top qualifications.
Can I just check with everyone, because our headphones aren't working at this point in time. Is Greg coming through to everyone? Can you just give a thumbs up on the screen? Yep, sweet, okay. Now for some reason, I'll check that in a moment, Greg. Right, are there any other questions there, Greg, coming through the chat? No. Okay, just so you are aware with the Cert 4, it is a Cert 4, not a Cert 3. So if you do the Cert 4, you will notice it steps up a little bit in, it's not really difficult. What the difference really is with the Cert 4, in the way you answer things is there's hardly any multiple choice and a lot more short answer. Still got your templates, still got your assessments, but there's a lot more short answer than there are multiple choice. But again, all the short answers, they're all in the learner's guide. So just to let you know that. And also the difference is in the Cert 3 investigative services, you have a lot of like your surveillance, like private investigation, surveillance, and that sort of thing. In the Cert 4, you're taking out the surveillance sort of side of it and you're putting in compliance. So in the government, in all the red tape, there's a whole lot of compliance that you've got to manage, and so there's a lot more compliance in it. It also covers things like search warrants, which you don't do as a private investigator, but as working for a government agency, sometimes you have to do search warrants, more other things like that. It gets a little bit more involved. So that's the difference.
Okay, just a question. Are there any opportunities to RPL any part of the Cert 4 from the Cert 3?
Yes. Well, not RPL because of the criteria that's involved, but there is one unit, and it's the unit we're doing this afternoon, 006, the record of interview. It's exactly the same unit in the Cert 3 that's in the Cert 4. So if you've done the Cert 3, you'll get a credit transfer straight across to the Cert 4, so you don't have to do that unit. So the Cert 4 is only 15 units to start with, and then that will reduce it down to 14 units. But as far as RPL, no, can't RPL other units across. Is that it? Sweet. All right, well, if there's no other questions, and this is what we're here for. We want you guys to ask these questions in this sort of opportunity to go, got this question about assessments or whatever, it's a burning question, I really want to ask it. Here we are. We want to answer your question so you can move on. The other thing I always say to students is I do not want you to get stuck on anything. If you come across something and you go, I don't know how to answer this, just flick me a message from the question. Just go down the bottom left-hand side, there's the message assessor, click on it, type me the message that you want to ask, because I will try and get back to you as soon as I can. Depends what's happening. But I want to give you an answer so you can move on, because I find what happens if people get stuck on something and they don't ask, they push it to the side and they don't come back to it and nothing happens. So please, to keep the momentum going, send me the message, let me answer your question so you can keep on going with it and get this knocked off. Okay, so what we're going to do is just going to take a 5-minute break. Greg is going to deliver the factual investigations, which is 3030. He'll go through it. He'll look at the short answer questions. You'll find that there are no templates with this one because the 3030 is you're uploading what you've done in the 3029 is uploaded for this this unit. So keep that in mind. I know 3029 is a bigger assessment, but the great thing about it is once you've done it and you've done the 2 videos that go with it, you're uploading exactly the same material into 3030, and then when you get to 3032, you're uploading exactly the same material again for that. So you don't have to do any more for those 2 units. You're just uploading exactly the same material. All right, let's have a break for 5 minutes, and we'll come back to factual investigations.
Okay, welcome back. Now, we're going to move on to a subject called conducting a factual investigation. Okay, CPPINV3030. Now, what you'll find with this particular unit is we've probably already spoken about everything in it. Okay, it's one of those units Paul discussed with you yesterday that there is a little bit of repetition. because factual investigation, as you know, is one part of private investigators' business. The other, of course, you know, is surveillance. So this is a relatively short unit, but please, again, as we go through it, you'll notice we have talked about a lot of this before. If you have any questions, please make sure you reach out and we'll discuss them. There are no templates at the end of this unit. You'll be glad to know, or there's ones that are used from another unit, so we won't be going through them. We'll have a look at the short answer questions at the end, just so you're familiar about where to find that material. Now in this unit we look at three things. One is preparing for a factual investigation, and you'll recall from yesterday that we discussed that. So when we say preparing for factual investigation, what are we doing? We're planning, aren't we? We're doing our investigation plan. We talked about that in some detail yesterday. And we'll also, the second thing we'll talk about is undertaking the factual investigation itself, you know, how to actually go about it and how to gather evidence. Again, we've touched on that already. And then the final phase is of course, finalising, which is really primarily based around writing reports, because that's what we do. As factual investigators, we gather the information, we gather the evidence, and we put it in a report to our client. Okay, so again, we've talked about report writing again, and I'm not here sort of to, you know, teach you to suck eggs of how to write a report. You'll remember yesterday I talked about how important it is to make sure you put time and effort into that report. Simple things like grammar and spelling and stuff, clients will pick up on. And if you're a new investigator and you're giving a report, even to one of the bigger investigation companies, and it's riddled with bad spelling and doesn't make sense and not clear, well, you won't get another job. Okay, so simplify it, spend a lot of time, have someone help you with it and read over it, because, you know, we've all done very long reports probably in our life and career, and you realise once you've been working on a thing for a very long time is that you sort of lose sight of grammar and spelling and simplicity. So make sure you, if you can, get somebody to read over it. Doesn't have to be another investigator, it can be just a third person to say, all right, this doesn't make sense or whatever. So you'll get better at that as you go through your career. Okay, so firstly we're going to talk about how do you prepare for a factual investigation. Well, as we've already discussed, it's about reviewing work instructions. Okay, and we talked about how to do that with the client, how to use proper communication techniques, active listening, taking notes. These are all things embedded in taking or reviewing work instructions. Things like procedures and workplace policies, compliance with legal rights. Again, these are things we've already gone over. Okay, what are work instructions? Well, they're rules and regulations and things like standard operating procedures, your codes of conduct, your other, you know, procurement policies, anything you might be investigating, fraud, risk management, whatever it is. To be compliant, an investigator needs to be aware of the policy and procedure and legislation that will impact on your investigation. So I guess the first thing is, you know, you're licensed under the act that you work, your state or territory. That's the first thing you need to make sure that you are. The second thing is whatever it is you're investigating, it could be the, you know, Motor Traffic Accident Act in whatever state you're in, just be familiar with that. Some examples of things that you need to be aware of course, are codes of conduct. Now, if you're sort of wanting to go into the investigative world involving more corporate and workplace investigations, things like codes of conduct will become really, really important. Okay, you need to know your way around them, what they are, what they look like. Every organisation, every government department have their own and have different ones, but majority of workplace stuff you'll be investigating will be actually codes of conduct breaches. And bullying, sexual harassment, fraud, misconduct, etc. is generally all found in the code of conduct. Typically, as a private investigator, you won't be investigating these on a criminal basis. You know, having said that though, I've known quite a few people that have started off as PIs and worked their way into government departments like, for example, the Tax Office. In Queensland with Crime and Corruption Commission, you all got those in all your states, ICAC, things like that. Once you have those skills, you're able to do those sort of things where you're investigating on a criminal basis. It's a different standard of proof, what we call a standard of proof, which we haven't really talked about too much in this course yet. Probably coming up a bit later, we'll talk about the standards of proof. Health and safety is another big one. I talked about policy in relation to that. Workplace incidents and accidents are another big area. Information storage and privacy we have done to death. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Everyone knows they act under the, according to the Privacy Act and the information privacy principles and all that sort of stuff. So we don't need to go over that again, I hope. Okay, how do you conduct preliminary research and inquiries to clarify investigation and client requirements? Well, sort of research that you need to be that needs to be conducted are things like we've talked about already. Data and information needs. So getting proper briefs from the clients, collecting and reviewing relevant information. So when you're talking to a client and obtaining instructions about a job, you need to make sure in your investigation plan or your proposal that you have access to certain things. Might be, for example, HR records, okay, computer records, whatever it is you think you might need. You need to identify what breach it is. So again, as simple as this sort of sounds, if you're going out to investigate something, like yesterday we talked about, investigating a dog attack, you need to actually know what am I investigating? That's the very first thing you need to ask yourself. And if you're in Queensland, you would know, wouldn't you, that you're investigating a breach of 195, Section 195 of the Animal Management Cats and Dogs Act, Queensland. It's a bit sad that I actually know that, I'm sorry, but my point is that you need to actually know what the breach you're investigating first, whether it's a health and safety breach or whatever. The appropriate level of investigation, as I said to you before, if you start work as a new entry-level investigator for the bigger companies, they will tell you what they want from you. Okay, so there's not a hell of a lot of planning going on with that, and the level of investigation is really determined by that client that you're working for. Bit different if you're working for yourself, where you determine the level. Identifying witnesses and suspects. We did a bit of that yesterday with the dog attack. So who were our suspect, the lady in the blue dress, you'll recall. Who were our witnesses? Well, there was another lady with the lady with the small dog. There was a car, you would recall, that drove past, possible witness. And you'll remember that we did a door knock / canvass where we identified possibly some other witnesses. So then you need to work out what order you're going to interview them. Okay. Just as an aside, we always interview the person of interest last. Okay. I'll talk a bit more about why we do that. Have a think about, I guess, why we do that. Why not go and interview the person of interest / suspect first? Because they might just admit to it and that's the whole thing closed, isn't it? Have a think about that over the course of this unit, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. And preparing a preliminary investigation report. Again, not something you will do as an entry-level investigator that much, but as you get more experience, work for yourself, perhaps do more complex investigations, workplace stuff, you will do a preliminary report. And that really is, all that is a plan. This is what you're going to do, this is how long it's going to take, this is what it's going to cost, these are the resources you need, that sort of thing. Okay, you need to identify information sources, select the methods that are valid, reliable, and make efficient use of resources. So what are information sources? Well, it's anywhere information can be obtained from. This is pretty obvious, I think. People, witnesses, experts, things we're talking about, exhibits, computer data, things like that, documents. And places, okay? You will find yourself, particularly as a new entry-level investigator, doing things like, I say slip and falls because they are very common. Maybe they're not that common, but they are a common type of investigation. You'll have to visit the scene. You might need to take some photos. You may need to make some assessments of the risk management there. And there may be a ramp, and is it exposed to the weather, and when it rains, does it get wet, is it slippery, what sort of coating does the floor have? all things to think about, or all things a good investigator thinks about. Do you need to take pictures? You know, do you need to measure things, etc., etc.? Is there a step on that particular building that's not built to code? These are things you need to pick up on. And then what would you do with that? You'd measure it, you'd take a photo of it, you may show that photo to an engineer, and that may be evidence that that company isn't, you know, that building's not built to code, and as a result, that may affect what you're going to investigate. So it's just things to think about. Two types of information sources. Primary source being raw first-hand information. So a statement from a witness, I saw this and that, he said this, she said that, etc. Secondary source being analysis or interpretation. Okay, that goes without saying. So yesterday, and we'll just touch on this again today, what are some of the types of investigation equipment? Now we've mentioned these: camera, audio recorder, computer, portable printer. We didn't mention portable printer yesterday. I've got one. Officeworks have them very cheap these days, and they just sit in a little suitcase, and they Bluetooth typically to your laptop if you've got one. Very handy to have when you're out in the field. What I find a lot of private investigators doing is going out, taking statements from people. That's all good. Then going, right, well, I'm going to go back to my office now, type it properly, send it back to you on email. You look at it, send it back to me, back and forwards, and eventually you'll sign it and I'll come and pick it up. Okay, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. I would rather grab my portable printer, sit there, type it out, print it out, sign it, bye. Move on to the next witness. Just my preference, something to think about for yourself. This is all about you as a professional investigator. So portable printer, definitely, don't rush out and buy one today, by the way, but wait till you get some work, but very handy. And I just have it sitting in my car all the time. Drone, didn't mention that yesterday. Look, there's laws around drones. I'm not that familiar with them. You've got to be careful where you use them. There are privacy things. Paul, yes.
Thanks, Greg. Can someone, when I'm speaking this afternoon, can someone ask me about drones? Remind me, because I had a very good conversation with a drone operator the other day he's a licensed pilot for a drone, and he actually gave me some of the rules and regulations which I'll share with people, which are very interesting about a drone. Okay. So if someone can just remind me later, I'll talk about that.
Will, sure. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so drones. Look, do you need to rush out and buy a drone? Look, no is the answer. If you're doing third-party insurance investigations, and a lot of them, and need a drone to get high footage of accident scenes or intersections or roads, yeah, hey, it may be worth doing it. I know they're pretty cheap these days, but there's obviously regulations around it.
What about the new ones that a lot of people have now in law enforcement with the body-worn cameras?
Okay, yep. All right, so body-worn cameras. Should a PI wear them? Interesting question. One I haven't thought of, but thank you for raising it. Look, body-worn camera, anybody can wear a body-worn camera, okay? You've got to keep in mind any legislation in your particular state around recording people. There's no inherent right to privacy in public that people have, so you can generally record anyone in public on video. Just be careful with the audio portion of that. In Queensland, we can record audio and video as long as one person knows. There's no different in New South Wales, be different in other states as well. Should you wear it? I don't know. What do people think? Would you? Why would you have a body-worn camera? And under what circumstances would you use it? So recording interviews, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but obviously again, the person's got to be aware that
Yep.
recording it.
Yep, okay. My preference, I mean, body-worn cameras they're fairly new and they're used by law enforcement. They're used by councils these days and anybody in compliance. They are typically, or they're primarily used for safety, not in evidence gathering. That doesn't mean that they don't gather evidence, of course. So look, I would say if you want to use a body-worn camera, go for your life. You just got to remember that some people are very off put by them. So if you turn up as a investigator to interview a claimant or a suspect and you're wearing a body-worn camera, it may have a negative effect. However, it also may be protection for you as well. So they're primarily a safety thing. I wouldn't recommend using them for evidence gathering. There are other things for that. Not to say you can't. Yeah. It's up to you. Do any of these items require training or a license? Well, we've talked about that. Drones being one example. Okay, so planning and sequencing factual investigation activities to meet work instructions and timeframes on. I don't know what that means. There you go. Every investigation has to start with a plan. We've talked about that yesterday. And that plan can include things like developing objectives, developing tasks. Timelines are very important. So clients need things done yesterday, generally. When you go and work for one of the bigger investigation companies, now I keep saying Quantum Court and Verifact. I say those because they are two of the biggest national ones. Of course, we're our own investigation company, but we're only small. But that's why, by the way, I'm not saying go to them. I'm just saying they have a network across the country of sort of hundreds of investigators. They will give you jobs to do, but there'll be strict timeframes around it. And one of the biggest criticisms of investigators is timeframes, because they are generally, those bigger companies are stuck to strict timeframes, really strict timeframes. So they might give you a job to interview 3 witnesses, attend a scene and take photos, and perhaps interview a suspect, and they will say you've got 10 days to do it, or 16 days, 15, whatever it is. And it's really important. You can imagine if you've got 4 or 5 of those jobs, your time management is going to be critical. Okay, so timeframes are a big thing in the industry, not only for you to who's giving you the job, but for that company to their client, which is generally a bank or insurance company or something like that. They expect and almost demand strict timeframes. So just keep that in mind. Time management is going to be a big thing when you're subcontracting as an investigator. Resources we've talked about. What will you need to do it? Timelines and contingencies. Contingencies are the what-ifs. Be aware that plans need to change. We spoke about that yesterday. And constant reviewing is needed throughout the investigation. Okay. Again, I say these plans don't have to be these magnificently produced, complex, detailed documents that you spend 3 hours doing. You're just not going to do that for a job that's going to take you 10 hours, are you? You're just going to knock out spend 10 minutes knocking out a quick plan and putting that in your notebook, or if you want to put it in a file note or in the system that you're working under. Okay, undertaking factual investigations and gathering evidence. That's what this is all about. Okay, so seeking permission to record interviews and meetings in accordance with legislative requirements. So what you need to be able to demonstrate, certainly for this course to get your certificate, is that you actually seek permission to record people. Okay, now there are some logistics around recording, which we'll talk a lot more in the next subject than the one after. Okay, but it's as simple as saying, look, I would like to interview you about this matter, this car accident that you were involved in where you were injured. Going to ask some questions. Is it okay if I audio tape our interview here today? Now they'll either say yes or no. We can talk a bit more about that this afternoon about if they say no, what do you do then? So seeking permission to record interviews and meetings is something you need to demonstrate. There's legislative requirements to record a conversation, normally found in, this says the Surveillance Devices Act, that relates to New South Wales, okay? So we can't record people without their consent. Queensland we can, I'm not sure of the other states. Organisations will have codes of conduct which outline rules and responsibilities of a person within that organisation. So if you end up in the field of workplace investigations, what will happen is that you'll be called in to investigate, let's say, for example, an allegation of bullying. Okay, and you might have some witnesses that have been identified. You may have the person who's alleged to have been the bullier identified. And typically in anything, in life, not just workplace or anything, everybody has what's called a common law inherent right to silence. You don't have to say anything to anybody. We've all got the same right. You've got the same right, so do people that you're interviewing. Criminals who've done an armed robbery have the same right. They don't have to say anything. It's a common law right that everybody has. So what happens when you go into an interview in a workplace for a bullying and you want to interview the bullier and he or she says, I don't want to say anything to you because that's their right, isn't it? Well, there are exceptions to that, of course. Not many exceptions, but some. One is they work for the organisation and the organisation's policy says, well, no, in fact, you do have to participate. You don't have to answer questions truthfully, that's not, or anything like that, but you do have to participate. In insurance investigations, if you're the claimant making a claim and you say, well, I don't want to say anything, well, the insurer will just turn around and say, well, you're not cooperating with the investigation, so we're denying your claim. It's as simple as that. So whilst everybody has a right to silence, there are certain ways around it. There's not many exceptions to that, except, God forbid you're sitting in front of the Crime and Misconduct Commission or something like that, where they force you to say something. Again, they can't force you to actually say anything. They'll just tell you you've got to answer. If you don't, they typically fine you or put you in a cell or something. So codes of conduct in organisations outline insurance acts, and insurance companies require people to participate. But if you've identified a witness and you're getting a statement from it, let's say a witness to a car accident, you can't make anybody say anything to you. That's it's back using your communication skills as an investigator to not persuade them, but to ask for their assistance. It's like, I mentioned yesterday the motorbike accident that happened in front of me. So I gave my name and stuck around and helped the person and wait till the cops turn up and they've got all my details. But if they rang me and said, we want to get a statement from you about it, well, do I have to? No, I don't. Will I? Yes, because it was a pretty serious accident. So some of the things that codes of conduct and other policy in organisations may require you to do is to document interviews, focus on the facts, ask open questions. So I'm not going to talk about this too much because later on this morning and this afternoon we're going to really focus in on all of this stuff. Okay, conducting and recording oral interviews and meetings to gather factual evidence. Best practice pretty well across the world in relation to private investigation, but corporate, workplace, etc., is to record interviews. Not necessarily with witnesses, although in the workplace world, that's best practice for that. So if you end up doing bullying, harassment, fraud, misconduct, it is best practice to interview your witnesses using audio recording, but certainly your suspects or persons of interest. If you're in insurance investigations, that's not necessarily the case. Because they won't pay for transcripts to get done and all that sort of thing. So an investigative interview is conducted to gather the facts. I mean, that goes without saying. What are some of the steps to conducting an effective interview? Again, this is stuff we're going to really drill down on later on this morning and this afternoon. Preparation, absolutely key. You can't just turn up not knowing anything, not even knowing what you're investigating, not knowing any facts. And off you go. Warnings and representation, we'll talk about how important that is. Do you need to give certain warnings to them about not cooperating or whatever? Is there an act that they're required to cooperate under, etc., etc.? Building rapport. Paul's going to talk about that in some detail. I cannot understate the importance of rapport building, whether it's a witness you're talking to, whether it's a victim or complainant, whether it's in fact the bad person that you're interviewing formally. Rapport is vital. And you might think, roll your eyes, I've got to sit down and talk to them about how their day was. Rapport is actually a lot more than that. Okay, so building rapport is a vital part of your job as an investigator with anyone you're talking to. Okay, and we'll give you a couple of key tips. Building rapport can be done in 10 seconds. Or if it's something very complex, it might take a bit longer, it might take 10 minutes. I wouldn't say an hour, but it depends on the situation. Questioning, including an account of the matter. So what we'll do today is show you a couple of things. One is your run-of-the-mill, quite good, nothing wrong with interview about something. And then this afternoon we'll show you a different way to do it. Look, whether you take that and use it is up to you. We're here to teach you the best practice way of what we call investigative interviewing. Presenting evidence, behaviour analysis, I wouldn't worry too much because, frankly, the behaviour of a person, whilst it can have an impact on their credibility, it doesn't actually have an impact on the evidence. And if you think about cultural stuff, it's no good analysing someone's behaviour because they're not looking you in the eye, or they're looking a certain way, or they've got their arms crossed. Look, that's all great, and there's a lot of research about that. I say as a professional investigator, don't focus terribly much on that sort of thing, okay, because it really doesn't matter. And conclusion, covering off inducements, etc. Interviews are not about obtaining a confession. Well, mind-blowing, isn't it? Everyone watch Law and Order, don't they? NCIS, come on. We all watch it. What are they all doing in their interviews?
Getting it done in an hour.
Yeah, well, yes. But what is their number one objective when they're interviewing people?
Just to force information from
To get the person to confess. That is how it's done in most US states and certainly on all US TV programs. Would not be a very interesting program, I can tell you now, NCIS or Law and Order, if they were conducting proper investigative interviews. No one will watch it, I can tell you right now. So about half the states in the US, they have all these different techniques. It's about getting interviews with people, about getting confessions, about getting them confess. I'm here to tell you, we, professional investigators, do not care whether someone confesses or admits to anything. I just don't care. It's not my job, Whether they've done something or not depends on the evidence, and that depends on the court, tribunal, decision maker, whatever. Okay. So remember, we are evidence gatherers. That's what we do. That's our job. We present the evidence. We make judgments based on different standards of proof. We're not about getting a confession or admission. Does that mean if someone tells us something, it's not good? No, that's fine. If someone wants to tell us, yes, I did that, or yes, I went through the red light and banged in the car, now the lady's disabled. Look, that's fine if they do that. But whether they do that or not is no concern to me, and I don't want it to be any concern to you as an investigator. Again, we will talk in some detail about that sort of thing. And by the end of today, you'll realise, well, yeah, in fact, actually, it's not about getting a confession. Okay. Olden days, in the police olden days, that's still what it was all about, even in the 80s into the 90s, get the person to confess. Sometimes whatever it took, which is a terrible thing to say, but I like to be real and tell you real things here, not flower the world up. Whatever it took to get someone to confess. In some countries, they use torture. They put hoses down people's throats and make them confess. Look, that world is very different to what we live in today. It's certainly different as an investigator, and we're professional investigators. Comprehensive statements and collecting physical evidence to support facts. Okay, so statements and records of interview are two different things, although they are intertwined. Okay, so a statement is something you will get from typically the victim or complainant or a witness. All right. Yes, you will ask some questions, but you're not formally interviewing them. But you are interviewing them to get answers to put in their statement. So statements, the form of a statement that you will take from somebody will be guided by whoever you're working for. Okay, if it is those bigger companies, they will have a particular format that they want you to do that. Statements should include, of course, relevant details, should always be in the witness's own words. Okay, very easy to read a statement from someone and know that it's not actually them saying it, it's you. Jargon is a big one to put in there. Okay, keep it simple, use their own words. Do not include hearsay. A bit of conjecture about that. I don't have an issue with hearsay. And be factual. So opinion, rumour, innuendo is not overly important in a witness to something. Okay. I don't like Joe Bloggs because last year, you know, he threw eggs at my house, and so therefore, etc. It doesn't really matter. Statements are one form of evidence, but there's many other forms, as you know. Things like physical, direct evidence, circumstantial. So, you know, I could probably spend the rest of the day just talking about these things. Circumstantial evidence is something that doesn't directly prove a fact in issue. Okay, so you've probably all heard of circumstantial and had some idea of what it was. Okay, but it doesn't directly prove. So anybody have any examples of what could be classed as circumstantial evidence?
Like a mobile phone on a tower, it could show the person was in the vicinity, but
Yep.
it doesn't actually place them at the scene of the
Yes, good. Yep, that's right. So everyone got that mobile phone data. So they use what's called triangulation, where they can pinpoint where they were. Has anybody seen what's that show? That original true crime podcast from years ago from America called, it'll come to me any minute now, where a lot of these things were gone over. But that's a good example of circumstantial evidence. Anything else coming through, Paul?
No.
Okay. So it doesn't directly prove. Okay. So it may surprise you, and just a little bit off track here, that a fingerprint developed by a fingerprint examiner is circumstantial. Okay. They actually say that DNA, pretty irrefutable really, but is actually circumstantial evidence. So it doesn't directly prove. Really the direct evidence that proves something is a witness from one person saying, I saw this or I heard that. Okay. So there's lots of different types of circumstantial evidence. Digital evidence we've talked a bit about. That's a good example of the phones. You know, phone messages, deleted messages, computer data, etc. Documentary, you will find yourself having to gather, analyse and report on documentary evidence. Things like cheques that have been written, hardly ever anymore, but invoices, receipts, other documents, anything that's a document. Forensics evidence, you know, is important. Look, whether or not in your role as a PI you'll ever have the need to gather and analyse forensic evidence, you wouldn't be doing it unless you are, of course, qualified and that sort of stuff. Something to think about. If you needed to get something analysed or forensically examined, no matter what it was, of course we all know that's what we report back to the client and say, this is what can be done, these are the advantages of it, this is what it's going to cost. And hearsay. Hearsay is inadmissible generally. So hearsay is, you know, someone told someone something who then told you. That's hearsay. As an investigator, if you get a piece of hearsay, you need to chase down where the source was. Okay, that's the best way to explain it. You know, I've done that for years and chased the source and finally found the source to have the source tell me, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're normally in jail. I'm on the way. Okay, so assessing gathered evidence to check sufficiency and accuracy. So evidence should always be checked, and Paul has mentioned this, two rules of, and they call these the two fundamental rules of evidence, relevant and admissible. I'm not sure whether that's a question, but if it is, I've answered it. What are the two fundamental rules of evidence? Relevant and admissible. And whether a piece of evidence, no matter what it is admissible or not, depends on a whole host of factors. So if it's not any of those, seek further evidence to fill any gaps, etc. What are the steps that could be taken to seek further evidence? Well, as I said, if you have a piece of hearsay evidence, chase down the source. Okay. And speak to the source of the, or I should say the alleged source of the hearsay. Statements, surveillance and documentation, obviously. Surveillance can sometimes fill in gaps in things. So you may not have sufficient witness evidence, or there may be a gap in what somebody's doing or something. So surveillance may be an option, okay? And again, that's up to the client. I had a client recently, I guess, just trying to tell this story without anything identifying, where it was investigating some alleged, I guess, commonly known as timesheet fraud. So it's going to be very difficult to prove because it's a bit of he said, she said. There's systems there that aren't quite right. So the best way, I thought, to prove a bit of timesheet fraud is to actually put surveillance on the people to see whether they were taking the breaks longer than they should. So it wasn't, that was an option to do. It would have provided good evidence, but there are some disadvantages to it, and the client chose not to do that, which is fine. So collecting factual evidence. Yep. To check and confirm its relevance, validity, and admissibility in court. Okay. Just like evidence obtained to meet the working instructions, it should always be checked that it's relevant and admissible, particularly when preparing for court. Now look, you won't find yourself having to do briefs of evidence terribly much in your role as investigators for courts or tribunals. You may, more likely you'll be asked to give evidence as part of a matter with a bigger client. We've talked about that. So, all right. So the last thing in this particular unit is finalising, and we have already talked about this a little bit. How do we finalise a factual investigation? Well, that is the report, isn't it? So it's about presenting factual information in a report that addresses work instructions and complies with workplace standards for style, format, and accuracy. That pretty well sums up everything I'm going to tell you. So do your reports, make sure they're in line with what the client wants, make sure they address what scope you identified at the start, and that they answer the questions the client wants to know. So if such and such is liable for the slip and fall, is that substantiated or not? And not just yes, but any good investigator always says yes or no because. Okay? Yes or no because A, B, C, D. Yes or no because 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything based on the evidence, remember? So reports where investigator brings all the facts and evidence in a concise manner. It should be complete, clear, concise, correct, and considerate. That goes without saying. And normally contains, these are basic things that they contain. Okay, there are different reports out there. Introduction, obviously. Scope, we've talked about. Executive summary is that one-page summary of everything. What the allegations are, what legislation you're working under, list of the evidence, who you spoke to, sometimes a summary of what they said, if not their full statement, the factual finding, any policies, conclusion and recommendations. Okay, I think that's all pretty straightforward. Presenting a report to relevant person, again, this is within agreed timeframes. Very important for you to remember that. Okay. Now, if you're, just as a little tip, you're doing a job as a PI and you can't meet the timeframes, make sure you communicate. Okay. Why? And not just because I decided to go to the beach or took a holiday to Bali or whatever. There may be compelling reasons. So that's why time management is so important. 3 types of external deadlines that may impact statutes. Okay, so they're what's called statute of limitations. Not terribly relevant to you, but different claims and stuff have different statutory timeframes on them, but you just need to know they exist. A discover deadline or a trial deadline. So sometimes you may be asked, so you may, I guess one thing we haven't talked about is, which may interest some people, is that one type of investigation is what's called criminal defence. Now this normally excites people because the whole criminal world and crime and judges and crooks and lawyers and cops is very exciting. Okay, but there is actually call for people to, investigators, private investigators, to do what's called criminal defence work. I do a little bit, not much. Doesn't really fit with my previous traits, as you could imagine, but having said that, I'm an investigator, so if a person wants me to, lawyer would like me to do something and it fits in with me, I'll go and do it. So you may be asked, for example, to go and get some statements from some defence witnesses, or go and analyse something, or do some surveillance on something, and you know, the cops may have arrested somebody and they've got a lawyer, and that lawyer may ask you to go out and get statements from people, or re-interview people, measure things, take things, and that's all criminal defence stuff. So it may be something that may interest you, and this deadline can be trial deadlines. Obviously trials that are run, you may be running around sometimes of the morning of the trial, getting stuff for your client who may be a defence lawyer. Securely storing factual information records. Now, we have talked this to death about privacy, ways to store things, and stuff like encryption. I don't think we need to talk too much about that. Just remember, you satisfy yourself that everything's secure. Okay, and that means logs. That means not breaking the chain of evidence, etc. Evidence may be needed into the future and stored securely. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the ways records of evidence may be securely stored. We have talked about that in detail. Right, and as you are aware, the practical assessment, which are the templates, are born out of another unit, which is INV3029. That's correct, Paul? Yep, okay. And that is conducting factual investigations, which really is one half of why we're here.